Okay, everyone, welcome for today's event. This is Mark Herzl. I'm the Export Manager at American Honda Motor Company and the Chair of the Programs Committee of the Foreign Trade Association. We welcome you to today's event, and we encourage each of you to consider membership in the FTA. And happy to announce we have a special limited time discount of 50% off corporate membership rates, which are normally $600, now $300. And one company representative discounts to from $300 to $150, and that's through December. So look at our website for more information, and we look forward to you joining. If you haven't already signed up, also the Los Angeles Area Chamber of Commerce has their World Trade Week tomorrow from 8 to noon, and that's always a great event. And also want to let you know about the October 20th at 1 o'clock. We're going to have
I think Mark was having some connection issues.
Well, in the interest of time, this is Cameron Roberts on behalf of the Foreign Trade Association. I want to welcome everyone to joining our webinar here today. And with no further ado, I'll let Michael Roll take over the program.
Sure, great. Thank you, Cameron. And Mark, apologies for your connection difficulties. Yes, so my name is Mike Roll from the law firm Roll and Harris. I'm the moderator of today's presentation. I want to give a big thank you to the Foreign Trade Association, and also, more importantly, to Houston Logistics for sponsoring today's webinar on CTPAT. We talked about putting this webinar together because, as many of you, well, all of you, since you joined the webinar, know the CTPAT portal and the minimum security criteria have undergone a pretty large overhaul over the last year or so. And many companies, whether it's my clients and I assume all of you who are on the phone, have had to do this overhaul of their answers to the MSC, or the minimum security criteria. And a lot of companies are, we found, let's say, struggling or realizing it's a bigger lift than perhaps they thought it would be. So we wanted to put together this webinar to give you guys some insights, some kind of benchmarking, let's call it, for lack of a better phrase, as to what to do, what are others doing with regard to, you know, you've just sort of woken up and realized, oh my God, I have to do this, this update. It's bigger than I thought it would be. It seems overwhelming. And so that's the purpose of today's webinar. With that, we have two presenters today. We have Carlton Rowe from G4S Corporate Risk Services. Carlton I've known for quite some time. He's a former CBP, actually import specialist, and also relevant here, supply chain specialist with Customs and Border Protection in Long Beach. He's been in private practice for some time now. He's going to be our first speaker. He's going to give you kind of an overview of what's new, what's changed, and just drill right into what you guys need to do. And then Cindy Hazlitt, who heads up the import operations over at Belkin, she's going to speak next. Of course, she's, if I can say it this way, Cindy, a real live importer who's having to deal with all this herself. So you'll hear directly from her as far as how she coped and coping. We'll find out which. But with that, let me turn it over to Carl. One last thing. If people have questions along the way for the speakers or for me or for each other, or just any question, you hopefully can access the chat box. I'll be, as the moderator, kind of scrolling through there, either writing down the questions or just peeking at them. We'll leave some time at the end for Q&A. And then also, last but not least, copies of the presentations will be circulated later. So with that, let me turn it over to Carl. I may go on mute just to keep down any background noise on my side. Take it away, Carl.
Great. Thank you very much for the introduction. I just wanted to say one more thing about my background. I did spend about 5.5 years at the U.S. Embassy in Tokyo. And in relation to that, my first day at the embassy in Tokyo was September 12th, 2001. So that was actually the same time as September 11th in the US. So it was exactly that day. And then, as everybody knows, CTPAT started right after that, and the US Customs Service eventually changed to U.S. Customs and Border Protection, and then it went into the Department of Homeland Security, and here we are today with CTPAT without the dash, which went away a couple of years ago now. What I'd like to do is just to go over some definitions, a little bit of history to make sure we're on the same page, some common questions we get all the time, and some general comments just from my perspective, from being a supply chain specialist and that sort of thing, and then a few examples. So let me just start out with this slide. What is the security profile? It's basically the way for customs to review information about your company to make sure that you're in compliance with the CTPAT standards, or the minimum security criteria, as they call them. This is located in the CTPAT portal, in the CTPAT accounts page, and I think everybody should know how to get there, but that's what we're talking about. The previous security profile was not carried over into the new security profile. So what they've done is they put an old version of that security profile in the partner document exchange, and I'm guessing everybody has found that by now if you don't have an offline version. A little bit of history on the new security profile, and this is really from a customs perspective. They published the new questions back in December of 2019. And on January 21st of 2019, they published Excel worksheets with updated versions of the questions. And then on April 28th, they revised a couple of questions in the minimum security criteria, or changed just a little bit. So they made a couple of revisions, and then all of that was input to the electronic web portal, and then opened for input for all the partners on June 1st. And that's the date everybody's familiar with. Next slide. For the importer segment, there's a lot of different segments. For the importer segment, there's 140 questions in 11 different sections. And as I said before, they're all based on the minimum security criteria. It requires an input to each answer. So you got 140 answers to put in there. And basically, it also has a way to link any supporting documents you might have, like procedures, policies, forms, or anything else you might want to attach to prove your point. And for the security profile, it's linked to something called the anniversary date on the CTPAT accounts page, which is when it is due. Now, the security profile is different than the minimum security criteria, just to make sure we're on the same page on this. The minimum security criteria for importers has 93 different standards in 12 sections. This was originally, the original CTPAT standards were put out as guidance, and then in 2005, they changed to what they call criteria, which had mandatory and recommended criteria. The first change to this came in 2018 when CBP published what they intended to be the new minimum security criteria. That was in 2018. It was just sort of a trial balloon they put out and published for review. In April of 2019, they revised those booklets. And then also in November of 2019, they revised. But importantly for us, the final versions came out with a publication date of March of this year. But it was actually uploaded to the CTPAT web portal on April 28th. So although they called it March, those final ones were in April. Next. I mentioned before the anniversary date. So the first question everybody asks is, when is this due? And the first answer you get from everybody is now. Technically, you really need to look at the anniversary date, because that's going to tell you, and that's on the CTPAT accounts landing page. I have two examples here. One is an anniversary date of April 1st, 2020, if you had an anniversary date showing that, it's due now, basically. If your anniversary date is after today, and the example I gave here is October 24th, 2020, then it's due that date. So it's really important to look at your anniversary date so that you can decide whether you should be asking for an extension, whether you still have a month or two to think about it, or your game plan, how to approach this. Next. This is the long version that's published in the CTPAT webpage that you first go to, but it's basically the same thing I said. Look at your anniversary date, see where you stand in relation to that, and that's going to tell you, for planning purposes, when it is due or the fact that it's past due. Next. The first question we always get is, where did the old one go? Why didn't they carry it over to the new one? Why are they all empty? How can they do this? The problem that they had is the new one, the new security profile, has 140 questions to answer. The old security profile had 49 sections for the importer segment. So they don't line up. You couldn't just input answers to the security profile. So what they did is they uploaded, as I mentioned earlier, a PDF version of your old one. And the expectation is you can take that and populate where you can or use it where you can, and then construct your new security profile, which has 140 questions based on the 93 criteria. Next. Okay, now that you know your anniversary date, the next thing to figure out is it due now, today? If you're not ready, then can I get an extension? And there was a recent presentation that was given on September 9th, and thank you to Pedro, who's on this call, for giving us that. It was part of one of the presentations they did on CTPAT, where it is now. And it actually, you can get 30, 60, 90, or 120-day extensions, but you really need to talk to your security specialist, your supply chain security specialist. You should try to stay in communication with them. Just don't go silent on them. It's best to try to talk to them about this, especially if it's due now. Next. The new security profile, as I mentioned, has 11 sections. These are the 11 sections. And one of the things you might have noticed is that the security profile has 11 sections, but the minimum security criteria has 12 sections. What they did is, in the security profiles, they combined conveyance and seal questions into one section. So that makes it one section less, but it still covers the complete minimum security criteria with all 12 sections, 140 questions in 11 of the security profile sections, if that makes any sense. The next thing to really realize is the difference between should and must. The minimum security criteria, if anybody's looked over it, always has should or must in the question, but you know right away if it's a mandatory question or if it's a recommended standard. The security profile doesn't have must or should in it, but they did put a sentence in each of the must questions that says this is a requirement. That's their signal that this is a must and it's a mandatory requirement. So if you're trying to figure out which ones are musts and shoulds, look for that statement. This is a requirement, or these are requirements. Next. I just wanted to make some general comments on this whole thing. The standards were strengthened throughout. There's a lot more detail in there. You really need policies, procedures, work instructions, forms, and it really needs to be on an annual review basis because they ask for that all the time. One big takeaway that we found when we're working with various companies is that the person that originally did it before really can't do it alone anymore. You really do need input from your IT people. You really do need input from HR or anybody else that's supposed to participate in this process. From a CTPAT perspective, and you'll hear this if you talk to the supply chain specialist or CTPAT, they've been working on this since 2017. They started publishing this in 2018. They told everybody that they were doing this and that it was going to be effective in 2020. So from their perspective, everybody's had plenty of time to be working on this. We know that most of us were waiting until the final criteria, which actually didn't come out until this year. And then the actual security profile, of course, didn't come online until June 1st, and that gave us all impetus to, we better get working on this. So from their perspective, we've been working on it, but from our perspective, it really didn't become available, and we didn't know the final versions until even June 1st. They could have changed it then. Next. My suggestions for doing the security profile. This is from when I was a supply chain security specialist. Keep the answers short. The last thing they want to see is that you drop a 30-page procedure into that answer. They just want to know the answer. And then they want some backup documentation if you can provide that at all. So keep it short. Make it easy for the supply chain specialist to find the answer. Put some documents in there if you have them. Keep the answer close to the beginning of your statements. You'll notice as you go through these 140 questions that there's a lot of repeating. And it seems like they're asking the same question over and over again. It's okay to repeat. But when you repeat, don't say refer to section whatever, or I said this before, or it was in the previous section, or anything like that. Just repeat your answer. The supply chain specialist is in the same predicament you are. They look at one screen at a time, and they have to approve one screen at a time. So make it easy for them. Answer the question. Repeating is fine, and just keep it brief. If you do identify a gap, and you know you specifically don't do something, don't just say we don't do that. Try to explain what you do have. If you're halfway there, if you're partially there, or whatever, you never make a false statement, but you do describe what you have in a positive manner, and you really just need to try to answer the question. If you do identify the gap and you actually get them to approve the security profile with the gap, you really need to keep it as a gap and work on it, because you can update the security profile anytime after it's approved or at your next time that you review the security profile at your next anniversary date. One thing the supply chain specialists are always looking for are future statements. They've been specifically told not to accept future statements. So it's always agonizing for them to say, we will change this or we will do that. They're looking for what's in place now. So try if you can to avoid future. Next. I wanted to go through some examples of some of the issues we're seeing when we work with various companies. One of the first one is upper management responsibility. This is a should, it's a recommendation. Here's the security profile question. You can see it on the screen. But they really would like you to have a cross-functional team so that you can work on this with people, so that you can actually get good answers to all this stuff. And we strongly recommend it because you really can't do this alone. Previous to this security profile, a lot of people did it alone. You might have had a trade person, a security person, somebody else in the company, etc. Next question. Next. The next thing we're always looking for is a statement of support. This is something the supply chain specialists are specifically looking for. It's a good way to communicate to your upper management the significance of this program. And besides it being something that CTPAT wants, in my perspective, it's a real good way to talk to upper management about the issues that you have. You need to assemble a team, you need their support, and CTPAT is expecting to see this support statement displayed somewhere in your company. If they come out to visit, they're expecting it to be on the wall, but it could be on a website, it could be posted somewhere, it could be anything. So this is important. Next. The risk assessment. One thing that we always get asked about is mapping of the supply chains. This is really easy if you have a small company and you have a couple of supply chains. Say you're a company that has a supply chain from Mexico and you always have the same supply chain, it's really easy to map. But for most medium or larger companies, it's almost impossible to map every supply chain. If anybody has any ideas on this, I'd be glad to hear it, but it's really hard. So what we suggest is at least get together what you know, and a lot of different sources for that. It could be from ACE information that you've downloaded. It could be from internal information that you know about the supply chains. It could be from procurement. It could be from transportation providers, contracts, or anything. But our suggestion is always, once you try to figure out your supply chains, always look in ACE, because the ACE information that CBP has on you is what the supply chain specialist thinks your supply chain looks at. So if what they see doesn't look like anything like the supply chains you're envisioning, then you really need to reconcile the two. So, see what CTPAT is looking at, use your own, add what's missing, try to make sure your risk assessment covers all your business partners. That's the main point. CTPAT is always looking for cargo at rest. And then again, that's easy to do on a small, easy supply chain or a simple supply chain, but really hard when you've got lots of different people involved. But it's a subject they're always going to ask about, so try to keep that in mind when you're looking at your supply chain and doing risk assessments. Next. One of the new mandatory requirements is that you're supposed to check, a partner is supposed to be checking an AEO or CTPAT status of a new business partner during the business partner selection process. We're finding it's very difficult to do that. And the way it works for many companies, at least the ones we deal with, is that they have their own processes, and then when they're done, we might get a list of business partners, or we might figure it out in ACE, and then we start to try to figure out, are they CTPAT, are they AEO, are they a member of one of the various AEO mutually recognized programs, or even some other AEO program. It seems to be an after the fact kind of thing. But the new mandatory requirement is that you're supposed to try to figure this out at the time that the business partner is selected. It's a hard stretch for a lot of companies, but keep in mind that this is what they're looking for. Next. One of the big things we're always running into with all of our companies that we work with are documents. We can't just say we do something. They need to have policies, procedures, work instructions, forms, anything to prove. Now, you won't have things to upload for all 140 questions, but there should be some base documents that you should be able to upload. You should be able to upload seal procedures, if you have seals, inspection processes. There should be some base documents that you should be able to upload. Something about your risk assessments, that sort of thing. it's pretty easy when you go through it to see things, well, yeah, I should have something for that. And if you don't, and you identify it as a gap, our suggestion is that you really work on that, if not now, at least. Part of this is that the various procedures, policies, et cetera, are supposed to be updated periodically, and that's covered throughout the new questions and the new minimum security criteria. So if you don't have a way in your company that identifies that documents need to be updated or when they're updated, the update records, it really needs to be added to all the documents that you have so that you can get on some kind of schedule to update. Next.
Sure, Carl, just before I go to the next slide, and sorry to interrupt your flow, but I got a couple of comments about the volume being low. I don't know if it's on your side or if it's a system, but if you can, just raise your volume just a little bit, maybe that would help. Not that you have to yell, but just a little bit, it might be good.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay, the next one is some general comments on the conveyance and seal section. And basically in this, if you need conveyance inspections, there need to be 3 different inspections. And that's the old security inspection that we had before, agricultural inspections, and also the seal inspections. And that's the VVTT. So what we've been finding from a lot of customers that they try to put that all on one inspection sheet, but you don't need to. But Customs is looking for all of these inspections if you actually need to do them. If you need to push these inspections out to your supply chain business partners, they need to know about all 3 inspections. Next. One extra one that they added, a mandatory one, is that the locking mechanisms has more, it needs to be specifically identified. Now we know that was in the old inspection form as locking mechanism, but we suggest you strengthen that a little bit in your inspection form and actually call out things like doors, handles, rods, hasps, rivets, brackets, that kind of thing on the inspection form. And this also needs to be included in the training. Next. Agriculture inspections. This is one of the new ones. It actually includes 2 things. It includes not only the conveyance agricultural inspection, but the cargo inspection, immediate surrounding area, the staging area, anything close to the cargo. It really needs to include both visible pest contamination and the wood inspection, the ISPM 15 compliance, if you or your supply chain customer or business partners use any wood packaging materials. This is a must. Next. Another thing that we see as an issue is the old criteria had something about gates need to be manned or monitored. Well, the new criteria specifically says that gates means any points of ingress or egress. So that includes doors, any other access points, employee entrances, all of that stuff. So you need to make sure that all of that is covered in the physical security section, being manned or monitored. Monitored can be cameras. It can be actively monitored. It could have a card access control system, which is a form of monitoring. So there's a lot of different ways to do this, but it needs to be manned or monitored. Gates, entrances, everything. Next. Cameras. There's a lot of new criteria on cameras. Now we all understand that cameras are a recommended item, but we need to also recognize that if you do have cameras, it's mandatory that you meet all these requirements in the camera section. So they have to be aimed correctly. You just can't have a camera sort of aimed up in the air over the cargo area that's not on the cargo area, not focused or not at the entrance. You know, it's just not positioned correctly. It's not capturing the right information. This is a mandatory requirement now. It needs to be looked at, reviewed, make sure it's operating correctly, all of that stuff. So position the cameras correctly if you have them. Next. One of the new requirements in there is somebody is supposed to monitor camera footage from now and then in an audit basis. And the way they describe this is verify that cargo security procedures are being properly followed. What this means is that when you look at the camera footage, you should be verifying whether the inspection processes are being followed, whether the VVTP for the inspection is being followed. If the camera you're looking at is at an entrance, you could be reviewing for piggybacking. If it's at a gate, you could be looking for compliance with entrance processes at your gate and that sort of thing. So actually, not just making sure the camera's working, making sure that people are doing what they're supposed to be doing in view of the camera. This is a must. Next. Access controls. One of the big changes in access controls is that the driver log is supposed to be filled out by a facility employee. It's not just a clipboard by the driver entrance where they sign in anymore. It's filled out by an employee of the facility. It could be electronic. A lot of companies have electronic. That's good. Drivers are not allowed access to this log, and this is a must. So this is a big change for a lot of facilities, and I would guess for a lot of foreign suppliers too. Next. Another addition to the new criteria is a must one on the security guards. There need to be procedures, post orders, sometimes they're called, documented policies and procedures that need to be reviewed with the guards. Usually guard companies publish their own. That's okay, but it needs to be reviewed by company people. Or if you have your own guard procedures, those need to be reviewed periodically with the guarding company to look for opportunities to improve. Next. Education and training. It gets really detailed again, but the major takeaways I have from that is there more detail, and you really need to have evidence that the training was done. Next. Cybersecurity. If anybody's taken a look at that, there's a lot of new things in there. There's 21 sections for the importer segment, a lot of detail, and you really need help, especially in medium or larger companies, from your IT department to help fill this out. You know, it's essential that you get their input. One issue that we've run into with companies that we work with, a lot of IT companies don't want to reveal some of this information. You know, that might be fine with some of the supply chain specialists, but we really need a little detail in there. And they need to be part of the team, because if this ever comes up during a validation, they need to be responding to the customs people directly. Or if this gets rejected in your security profile, they need to help answer why and provide detail. Next. That's all I had. I think we'll save questions to the end. I'm sorry if you couldn't hear me. I hope you can hear me better now. And I think we're going to turn it over to Cindy.
Yes.
After we get it set up. Hold on.
You should see, Cindy, you see your presentation now? I'm the official slide turner, so any screw-ups there are mine and mine alone.
I see it. Okay. Hi. I'll start with a little bit on my background. Is that on 9/11, I was the global compliance manager for Skechers at the time, and I was in Belgium, and we watched live the second plane go through the building. It was such a sad time. And coming home, I was traveling by myself. It took me, I think, 3 or 4 days to get home because it was on a Tuesday and the airport didn't open up till Wednesday. So just wanted to get home to my family. But we know CTPAT was born out of that act of terrorism. And in November that year, I had my account manager calling and asking me to join the security program. So military style, I volunteered. Kind of hard to say no. And but today, I'm the senior manager of global customs compliance for Belkin, and still working with CTPAT and all its different changes and updates. And this year, our anniversary date was June 1st. So they opened up the portal and we went to look at it and were overwhelmed by all the answers that we had to supply in such a short amount of time. But we did go to our account manager and ask for an extension, and he was very good at helping us with that. Okay, I started with this because this is the slide, the area when you're on the portal that will show you all the areas that you do have to answer. And maybe I'm bragging a little bit because if you notice, they all say complete. And very proud of my team. And Teresa Roscoe, who's the compliance manager in our department, did just an incredible job making sure everybody stayed on track and we got this answered. So this was, for us it's done, but now we have the ISA that we have to finish up. As Carl said earlier, keep your answers short and sweet. There's plenty of answers, plenty of places to put information. And if you think it's not enough, your supply chain representative will come back to you and you can answer at that point. But you put something in and try to keep going. You don't put a novel for any of the questions. So this is, how do we get there? This can be kind of overwhelming. Okay, next page. So the first thing is, I'd say have a kickoff meeting, but you've got to prepare for that. You've got to have a game plan. And we went through and we reviewed our company obligations, and then we reviewed the company individual responsibilities. So we knew where we were going to assign different questions. We knew who to invite onto the team, representatives from the various departments, and then we started reaching out to them. It's more like you're the coach. Again, like Carl said, you're not going to know all the answers. There were a few where we stepped in and helped with looking at that. Look at it as you do have security processes in place. And this is more of looking at your processes. Do you have holes in them? Then you can help direct that. But you need, as you're preparing for this, you're looking at all the disciplines of the company so that you can get input from all of them: marketing, the warehouse, the supply chain, purchasing, HR. You may not think HR is involved, but they are, especially like they track the training and they help with training needs and who's hired, requirements of how we're hiring people. So they were very helpful with CTPAT. The other thing is somebody has to sign for the CTPAT. And in the past, we've always had a vice president sign. And yet this department, we've had reorganizations and that vice president has changed over time, or we've gone to the CEO, but he may be traveling. So this time we decided that I would be the signing, but don't wait till the last minute if you're not going to use an officer of the corporation, because you've got to get a POA signed for customs authority and have that ahead of time. It gives the company time, the legal department, to look over the POA to make sure it's appropriate, that you don't, that your benefits and your signing authority are in line with what you need and it's covered. And that way, when it's ready to go, you can press that send button. It was one thing off our to-do list at the very end that we weren't scrambling when we were coming up towards the end. Okay, next page. This is the slide, or this is the template that I highly recommend. Really, you can find, I think you can find this template, most of this template, in Carl's slides and also on the CTPAT program, and you see underneath are all the different questions, the different areas, and then it rolls up to the front page, the 220 CTPAT. What we did was we added column H where it said department or ownership, and we put somebody's name there so that we knew who we were sending out the request to. We put down the date that we sent the request, because and then we gave them a due date. But sometimes they missed that due date, and so we'd have to follow up. These seem very simple suggestions, but they were very helpful. And then at the end we had comments, a column for comments, so that we could put any other notes we needed. The nice thing about this format, I mean, I just love Excel, is that it's easy to track for the following year. Okay, next page. So, I've already mentioned about the template. Very, very helpful to have that template. And I just love that it's gone to Excel and that it's one line on Excel. I'm struggling with other areas of customs that, like the 7501 is on multiple lines, and I wish they would change that, but I can't change the world today. And then, as you saw, the tabs for each section. Determining the department's jurisdiction really helped. It helped us focus that we were sending out the questions to the right people. And I recommend, when you give them a time frame, give them a week. If you give them longer, they'll forget about the question till the very end and they won't have the answer. This way it keeps the question up front in their minds, gives them some time to come up with the answer, and if they need longer, well, then you can extend it, but you've got them working on it and realizing they've got to get back to you. Some of the questions may be difficult for them, that they're not quite sure what to do, and I found the best thing to do is you just ask the partner to repeat the question and then let them start to answer the question. And as you approach it, you know, think of it as, what would my supply chain specialist want to know? And answer it, try to answer it from their perspective, because this is really where the answers are going and they're going to evaluate them. We found that most questions resolved themselves by taking this approach. Okay, next slide. If you have questions, contact your supply chain specialist. I mean, one of the things we did was we reached out, being due on June 1st and getting in this really in the beginning of May. We weren't prepared to be ready with all this going on. And so we asked for an extension, and other things in customs took over and swept up our time, and we needed a couple of more extensions. We got it done. We sent it. I remember the last extension was just for one more week or just a couple more days, and he gave us another couple weeks, and we got it done, and we were able to finish everything off and review all the questions, and that way we weren't scrambling. But it kept us on track trying to meet the deadlines. The best part was we told our supply chain specialist where we were at and what help we needed, and reaching out to them for questions, for clarification. They really are a wealth of information. and they were very, very helpful. If you have items that are missing, you can say working towards and even put some future action items on them and how you're going to get there. We have a couple of things that we have not done yet that are new to this program, and we do have action items for them. But the supply chain specialist told me, I'm going to want to see progress next year. I know he's going to be looking at those items. We are actually, some of those items we were told to by our auditors. They're working hand in hand with it. So we were already on one page of setting up extra training, and then CTPAT asked for it, the same training. So it's going to work out, and I'm sure that next year we will have the answers to that. I found the hardest thing in this whole program was to get started. So I'm just going to say the hardest thing, start. So what you do is you just put a schedule on your calendar and you put down a planned project. Doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to start. And then after that, your to-do list. You set up a spreadsheet, the spreadsheet with this, you determine who the question ownerships are, and you assign ownership. And that's it. That's what you do to get started. When I was in college, I had a professor, when we had to write our business analysis course on a case study, he gave us the first two paragraphs of the paper. And I thought, well, how lame is that? We're college students. We should be able to write this. But he gave us the two paragraphs, and it really focused on how the paper was supposed to be written. Turned out to be a very good tool. I used it for many years and actually even used those same two paragraphs to start my other school papers and even into graduate school. It was very helpful. Okay, but that's what this is to help you go on. Okay. And then the new areas. So you've got agricultural procedures. And you know, the first thing you see that you're like, well, I'm not agriculture. I'm not growing corn. I'm not, it doesn't affect me. But it affects all importers about pest control. And they want to make sure that we're not getting information in from other, not information, we're getting pests or uninvited visitors from other countries. And so they're looking at the wood pallets and other items for control to make sure that they're free of pests when you bring them in. It's really good business practice too. So it's nothing new for us. It's just now more official, and it's part of CTPAT. The other part was social responsibility. CTPAT expanded it this year. It's a focus for customs, and there are some new questions in it. Now, some of those questions, I've seen them in the past. I've seen that, as a publicly held company, we have criteria in place. We have to meet certain standards. And it's really just good business practice. You don't, especially now with the way the internet works, and you don't want bad publicity out there. So you want to be doing things right anyway to start with, so people can't come back later to say that you have not been conducting yourself in a way that would harm the company or society. So it's really not a bad thing to have this expanded social responsibility. The one that we found new that was different was the money laundering questions. And what are you doing for screening for money laundering? And some of it's behind the scenes. It wasn't our first thought in customs compliance, but then you go to the finance people or the accounting people who will know more, especially finance department, about this. But the thing about the money laundering is we do denied party screening. We have a subscription service. We screen all our vendors and all our customers every night, and we get an exception list. And that actually will kick people out who are doing money laundering. If you have a customer even who has a division that's got caught, let's say down with the drug dealing in one of their divisions, and they're off the rails with how they're supposed to be conducting themselves, they will end up on that money on the denied party screening, and that's for money laundering. It's one of the criteria. So we had it in place. We just had to identify, yes, we are screening for that, and it wasn't a problem. The other was training. Evaluate the training, what needs you have, and who's trained for what. That was not as much with the CTPAT focus with the training that we've had, but you know, one of the advantages of the pandemic has been webinars, has been computer training, the explosion in all these online classes. It makes training much easier, and it is so easy now for us that I can go to HR and say, you know, we need to train the warehouse people in extra security criteria. He pulled up so many classes to look at and say, okay, which webinars do you want to assign to these people? And then they get trained. We've always gotten trained in security and safety and building safety yearly. Just it was a requirement of our landlord, and now it's exploded even more. There's all sorts of opportunities out there. So don't be put off by that question. It's easier to answer than you think. And hopefully I opened the eyes up to some of the people here on the call today. So. And working with your partners, the ODM. So is somebody needs to be on mute in the background?
Yeah,
I don't know. A little bit, but not that much.
Cameron, can you mute everyone? Is that possible? Or other than Cindy, I think maybe Gary is, well, Gary shows is muted, but just if everyone can make sure you're muted, please.
Okay. On the ODM, on our factories and our vendors and our factories, we have a questionnaire that we created. It came from, for us, and it came from the CTPAT questions. But we have incorporated that all along as part of the vendor audits, and we've had that for years. So now their questionnaires are not quite as robust as ours. They're not quite as many sections, but they're rolled up for manufacturing. And right at this point, we don't upload their answers into the CTPAT portal. We don't see it's required. It might be in the future, but not today. But we do have spreadsheets where we keep their answers. And the other thing about the ODMs is all vendors get the questionnaire. All are supposed to answer it. But, you know, we concentrate by spend. For us, we concentrate by the top 10-30. And for exceptions, new vendors, or we've had many vendors this year relocate due to the 301 tariffs. And so those vendors that have changes or are new or are larger vendors, they get a bigger or a closer audit, and time is spent in their factories to make sure that they are meeting all the requirements, including the social responsibility questions. Very important. Okay. So the legacy information, I didn't quite finish that slide. The legacy information helped us, but it's still, Teresa still had a lot of work to do inputting all the extra information this year. Hopefully going forward, it won't be as heavy lifting, and it'll just be updates, but that's it. And customs input was very helpful for us. Okay, next page. Our supply chain specialists, I want to say they've evolved over time. You know, when they first came on board back in 2001, customs was scrambling about who was going to be a supply chain specialist. They pulled many out of the front line. Some of them were enforcement minded, which you want them to be enforcement minded, but they needed to be more security minded. And they weren't as easy to work with, but the ones that I'm talking about, they've retired, so it's okay. It's been almost, you know, we're going on close to 20 years. Next year, we're at 19 years now since this program started. I can't believe it. And now the supply chain specialists have had, I think, added training in security. They understand it more. They're a resource, and they're very helpful. Our supply chain specialist, he sees this as he's an advisor, he's a motivator for us. The most important thing we can do is keep them informed. They don't want surprises. If you have a security breach and you're going to report it, well, even if you're not, I mean, you let your CTPAT supply chain specialist know about it, know what happened, and you provide open communication with them. They help provide direction for us and validate. And the most important thing is be honest with them. Don't make things up because you have to get the question answered. Say, I don't know, or I'll get back to you on it. That's a better answer, that, you know, I can't answer today, I have to check it out, than to just make something up because you think you have to answer immediately. And let me see, next slide. Next slide is my contact information if you have questions. And that is my department's contact information if I'm not available. But glad to answer if you have any other questions about this, or you just need somebody to help kick you past that start line so you can get to the finish line and press the send button. And that's it. So
thank you,
with
Cynthia.
that, I can open it up to questions.
Yeah, I think we have, in the interest of time here, we have just a few minutes, barely, which is perfect. We have one question, which is an interesting one about the shoulds versus the must. I suspect, Carl, this is a question for you. This person says that they had heard that you don't really have to answer the shoulds. I mean, assuming you don't have information or you're not doing whatever the should is. And can I just answer the must?
That is an excellent question. The last seminar that they had, one of the presenters from, not the regular CTPAT people, but from the ISA group there, actually said that. You don't need to do any of the recommended. From a security profile perspective, though, they're looking for an answer. That means that for them, although it's recommended, they're looking whether you do it. And if you don't do it for some reason, you really need to say so, but say it softly because they're looking for an answer. I was shocked when they said that at the seminar, but it wasn't one of the CTPAT managers or anything. And I'm pretty sure that their standard is still that, yes, it's recommended. Yes, you don't necessarily need to do that, but you just can't put in the security profile, no, I don't do that. It's only recommended.
Great, thank you, Carl. Maybe just one more quick question and then we're gonna wrap it. Sorry, go ahead, Cynthia.
I just want to say, we answered every question. Whether it was a should or a must, we answered it. So.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to agree, but I'll just in the interest of time, let me ask the next question, which is what kind of training are they looking for in regards to money laundering? You know, some of these new areas, right, training needs to be created for the new areas as well. So I would ask just more broadly from either of you, Cindy or Carl, kind of, how do you train people on money laundering when you, as the person who's the quarterback or the coach of the CTPAT team, maybe you yourself are not an expert on money laundering or whatever the new criteria is, agriculture inspections, whatever.
For the money laundering questions, and the training, I turned it over to our legal department and HR and let them decide. And I put it out there, and then but they were already working on those questions. They already had meetings and discussions about we need to put training in. This is not just a CTPAT question. You know, this is coming up in audits too. So they work hand in hand, and that's what we did. So this was one of, you know, I get to be the coach, and I don't have to fix it. I just have to put the problem out there.
I agree with Cindy on this one. I think this brings up an important point. You don't have to answer these yourself, like she said. You really need to reach out to other people in your company, and they can really help in these kinds of situations, because most of us wonder, well, where am I supposed to get that training? And then the links that they provided were not very good, CTPAT links. So I agree with Cindy.
Great, thank you, Carl. Well, with that, I want to give a big thank you again to Houston Logistics for sponsoring the webinar. Just one last quick closing remark from Mark, if you're there, or maybe from Cameron.
Mark, are you on the line?
Is Mark on mute? He's on mute.
He's unmuted now.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Yeah.
Hey, good. Well, thank you again, Michael and Carl and Cindy, for your time. We appreciate all you've done. Again, want to let you know that the FTA is having a 50% discount on membership. We have a couple of events coming up on October 20th. We're having John McLaren from the PMSA, having centralized examination stations as well, sometime in November, December, and then also working on a presentation with George Garcia, the director of the Electronics Center for Excellence. So certainly, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us today, and appreciate your attendance and look forward to future events. Thank you very much.